I was sitting in a plush leather chair across from a high-powered Atlanta attorney, ready to sign the paperwork for a $40 million inheritance from my late uncle. I was literally reaching for my phone to call my husband Marcus to share the life-changing news when the attorney slid a heavy file across the desk. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "Our records show your divorce was finalized 2 months ago in Fulton County." I froze. I was currently living with a man who had secretly legally divorced me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just smiled, realizing he had just legally forfeited any right to my new $40 million fortune. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed his entire world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love seeing greedy people fall into their own traps. My name is Maya, and at 34 years old, I thought I had a solid marriage. Marcus and I lived in a beautiful, sprawling home in Buckhead, the affluent heart of Atlanta. He was a financial broker, managing a lucrative investment fund, while I ran a boutique public relations firm. For years, I endured his elitist family who constantly reminded me that my business was nothing but party planning compared to their corporate empires. I swallowed their thinly veiled insults to keep the peace, believing Marcus loved me enough to make it worth the trouble. That illusion shattered completely in the office of Elias Sterling, the attorney handling my late Uncle Harrison's estate. Uncle Harrison was a quiet man who had invested heavily in early software patents. When he passed, he left the bulk of his quiet fortune to me, his favorite niece. Elias had called me in to finalize the transfer of $40 million. He was conducting a standard background check to establish my marital status for the trust documents when his face went completely pale. He turned his computer monitor toward me. It was a digital copy of a court decree from the state of Georgia. It stated that my marriage to Marcus Caldwell was officially dissolved. The date of the judge's signature was exactly 60 days ago. My breath caught in my throat. I told Elias there must be a clerical error. I told him I made breakfast for my husband that very morning. We shared a bed last night. There were no arguments, no separation, and absolutely no divorce papers ever handed to me. Elias clicked through the digital file, pulling up a specific document called a waiver of service. In the state of Georgia, if both parties agree to an uncontested divorce, the responding spouse can sign a waiver of service to bypass the formal serving of court papers. Elias printed the document and handed it to me. There at the bottom of the page was my signature. It was a spectacular forgery, mimicking the exact loop of my cursive, but it was absolutely not mine. As I stared at the forged ink, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. Marcus had orchestrated a secret divorce right under my nose. He had faked my consent to dissolve our marriage quietly and swiftly. But to file this document, he needed a notary public to verify the fake signature. I moved my eyes to the notary stamp pressed right next to my forged name. The name on the stamp belonged to a woman I recognized instantly. She was the executive assistant at a real estate firm owned by Trent. Trent was my sister-in-law's husband. He was a wealthy, arrogant, white real estate developer who had married into Marcus's prominent African-American family and immediately appointed himself the gatekeeper of their wealth. Trent had always looked down on me, making snide remarks about my middle-class background at every family Thanksgiving. He constantly told Marcus that he needed a wife who understood high finance, not a girl who planned charity galas for a living. Seeing the notary stamp from Trent's office was the missing puzzle piece. Trent had helped Marcus falsify the legal documents. They had conspired together to forge my signature, bypass the legal waiting periods, and grant Marcus a secret divorce. Elias watched me closely, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. He handed me a box of tissues, expecting tears and hysterics. But the tears never came. Instead, my mind began calculating. I asked Elias a very specific question regarding Georgia marital property laws. I asked him what would happen to the $40 million if Marcus and I were still legally married today. Elias explained that while inheritance is generally separate property, Marcus could have easily tied it up in brutal, prolonged litigation by claiming commingled assets, demanding portions of the interest, or using it to leverage other marital properties during a divorce settlement. Then I asked Elias what happens to the money now, given that the divorce was officially finalized 2 months before the inheritance was dispersed. Elias leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face as he realized what I was getting at. He told me that because Marcus had rushed the secret divorce to completion 60 days ago, Marcus had absolutely zero legal standing to claim a single penny of my uncle's estate. By cutting me off illegally and secretly, Marcus had completely isolated himself from the biggest financial windfall of our lives. I slid the forged document back across the heavy oak desk. I told Elias to lock down the $40 million immediately. I instructed him to place the entire sum into an anonymous LLC and to seal the records so completely that no financial broker in Atlanta could ever trace it back to me. I wanted absolute secrecy. Elias agreed, typing rapidly on his keyboard to initiate the blind trust. He asked me what I was going to do about the forged court documents. I told him to do nothing. I told him to let the fake divorce stand for now. I walked out of the law office and got into my car. The drive back to our Buckhead neighborhood felt entirely different than the drive there. The tree-lined streets and massive mansions no longer felt like the neighborhood I was struggling to fit into. They felt like a chessboard, and I had just been handed the most powerful piece in the game. I thought about Marcus's behavior over the last few weeks. He had been overly cheerful, buying me small gifts, encouraging me to take weekend trips with my friends. I had thought he was just being a loving husband. Now I knew he was just keeping me distracted while he finalized his exit strategy and likely prepared to evict me from our home. I was treating me like a house guest who had overstayed her welcome. I pulled into the winding driveway of our house. The house Marcus had always proudly claimed his investment fund paid for. I sat in the car for a moment, practicing my facial expression in the rearview mirror. I needed to look completely normal. I needed to be the naive, dedicated wife who thought she was coming home to her loving husband. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. The house was unnervingly quiet. I set my keys on the entryway table and slipped off my heels, walking silently on the hardwood floors toward the back of the house. I heard the faint sound of hushed giggling coming from the kitchen. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Marcus was standing near the marble kitchen island. His arms were wrapped tightly around the waist of a beautiful blonde woman I had never seen before. She had her hands buried in his hair, laughing softly as he kissed her neck. The sound of my purse hitting the floor broke the silence. Marcus's head snapped up. The color drained from his face instantly as he shoved the woman away from him so forcefully she stumbled against the counter. He stared at me, his eyes wide with pure panic, completely unaware that the woman catching him in the act was no longer his wife, but a newly minted multimillionaire who was already plotting his absolute destruction. Marcus scrambled backwards so fast his expensive loafers slipped on the polished marble floor. He shoved the blonde woman away with such force that her hips slammed into the edge of the kitchen island. The panic in his eyes was absolute. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. But before he could even open his mouth to stutter a pathetic excuse, his corporate survival instincts kicked in. He smoothed the front of his custom-tailored shirt, let out a loud, artificial laugh, and reached for the blonde woman's arm, pulling her back into a professional stance. "Maya, baby, you startled us." Marcus stepped forward with a wide, breathless smile. He gestured to the woman who was currently staring at the floor, her face flushed a deep, guilty crimson. "This is Sienna. She is the new event coordinator I hired to help you with the family dinner tonight. We were just celebrating because she managed to secure that vintage wine my mother loves at the absolute last minute. She tripped on the rug and I was just catching her." It was the most insulting, poorly constructed lie I had ever heard in my entire life. I could literally smell Sienna's cheap vanilla perfume mixing with the scent of Marcus's expensive cologne from across the room. Her lipstick was smeared, and her breathing was ragged. A week ago, I would have screamed. I would have thrown the crystal vase on the counter straight at his head. I would have demanded answers, cried until my lungs burned, and begged him to explain why I was not enough. But I was not the same woman who had left this house 3 hours ago. That woman was a devoted, naive wife. The woman standing in the kitchen right now was a legally single multimillionaire who knew her ex-husband was actively trying to destroy her. I let a soft, warm smile spread across my face. I looked directly into Sienna's terrified blue eyes, and then shifted my gaze to Marcus. I stepped forward and gently placed my hand on his chest, right over his racing heart. That is so incredibly thoughtful of you, Marcus. I beamed, smoothing his lapel. I was actually stressing about the wine all morning. Thank you so much, Sienna. You really saved the evening. You can go ahead and head out now. I can handle the rest of the preparations. Sienna looked like she had just seen a ghost. She grabbed her designer handbag from the counter, mumbled a barely coherent apology, and practically sprinted out the back door. Marcus exhaled a heavy sigh of relief, wrapping his arms around my waist and pressing a kiss to my forehead. He praised me for being such an understanding wife, completely oblivious to the fact that I was mentally cataloging every single item in this house that I was about to strip away from him. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of my personal nightmare. I opened the door to find my mother-in-law, Beatrice, standing on the porch, draped in an excessive amount of gold jewelry that clanked together when she moved. She did not greet me. She simply thrust her heavy wool coat into my arms like I was the hired help and marched straight toward the dining room. Right behind her was Chloe, Marcus's spoiled younger sister, trailing closely beside her husband Trent. Trent was a wealthy white real estate developer who had married into this prominent African-American family 5 years ago. From the moment he put a ring on Chloe's finger, he had operated under the delusion that he was the white savior of the Caldwell legacy. He carried himself with a sickening level of arrogance, constantly acting as if his presence elevated their social standing. Beatrice and Marcus tolerated his blatant disrespect solely because Trent's real estate firm managed a massive chunk of their investment portfolio. I handed Trent his coat, and he did not even look at me. He walked straight to my car cart and poured himself a glass of Marcus's most expensive scotch without asking. We sat down at the long dining table. I had prepared a lavish spread, but Beatrice immediately began her usual routine of psychological warfare. She picked at her roasted asparagus, sighing loudly. The meat is a bit overdone, Maya. Marcus is accustomed to prime cuts prepared medium rare. I suppose you do your best with the middle-class recipes you grew up with, but you really should let me hire a private chef for you. We always worried when Marcus brought home a girl without a trust fund, but you do try so hard to fit in. I smiled placidly and took a sip of my water. Thank you for the feedback, Beatrice. I will definitely keep that in mind. My lack of a defensive reaction seemed to irritate her, but Trent quickly stole the spotlight. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch, and began bragging about his latest commercial property acquisitions. He talked over Marcus, interrupting him twice to correct his financial terminology. Marcus swallowed the disrespect, nodding along like a subordinate rather than a brother-in-law. When Trent finished boasting about his wealth, his pale eyes locked onto me across the table. You know, Maya, you are incredibly lucky. Trent smirked, his voice dripping with condescension. I tell Chloe all the time, this family needed my real estate vision to carry the Caldwell legacy into the modern era. But Marcus does his part, holding the line. If it were not for Marcus and his investment fund, do you honestly think your little event planning parties could pay the electric bill for a mansion like this in Buckhead? You hit the jackpot marrying into this family. You really hit the jackpot. The dining room went dead silent. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh behind her wine glass. Beatrice looked entirely too pleased with the insult. I turned my head slowly to look at Marcus. This was his house. I was his wife. This was the moment a real man would stand up, demand respect for his partner, and put his arrogant brother-in-law in his place. Marcus let out a weak chuckle and placed his hand over mine on the table. Now Trent, be nice to her. Marcus said, his tone patronizing and dismissive. Her little charity galas keep her busy during the day. It gives her a sense of purpose. It is cute. He did not defend me. He agreed with them. He sat there and let a man disrespect me in my own dining room because to Marcus, I was just a placeholder. A naive, financially dependent prop that he was already in the process of discarding. I did not throw my drink in Trent's face. I did not scream at Marcus. Instead, I stood up from my chair, picked up the bottle of vintage red wine Sienna had supposedly procured, and walked slowly around the long table. I stopped right behind Trent's chair. I leaned over my face, inches from his ear, and poured the dark red liquid perfectly into his glass, without spilling a single drop. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I said, my voice smooth as silk, echoing clearly in the quiet room. "I am so incredibly lucky. I am deeply grateful for everything Marcus is doing behind the scenes. More grateful than any of you could possibly imagine." Trent smirked, taking a long sip of his wine, thoroughly satisfied that he had put the poor working-class wife back in her place. Marcus beamed with pride, completely oblivious to the lethal irony in my words. They all thought they had broken my spirit. They thought I was finally submitting to my role at the bottom of the family hierarchy, as dessert was being served. Marcus excused himself to go to the restroom. He stood up in a hurry, leaving his phone sitting face up on the edge of the marble kitchen island, just a few feet away from the dining table. I stood up to clear the dinner plates, humming softly to myself. I walked past the kitchen island and glanced down, just as the screen of Marcus's phone lit up brilliantly in the dim light. It was a text message notification. The sender's name on the screen read, Trent. I looked over my shoulder. Trent was still sitting at the dining table, typing casually on his phone, hidden under the tablecloth, secretly texting Marcus while sitting right in front of me. I looked back down at the glowing screen on the counter and read the preview of the message. "Money transferred to your offshore account. The deed to the Buckhead house has officially been moved into my company's name. Congrats on being a free bachelor, man. Remember you promised to go wedding dress shopping with Sienna next week. She is driving me crazy about it." I stared at the glowing letters until the screen faded to black. Sienna was not an event planner. Sienna was the fiancée. Trent had not just helped Marcus forge my divorce papers. He was actively helping him hide marital assets, draining Marcus's accounts into offshore funds, and transferring the deed of the very house I was standing in to his own real estate company, so I could not claim it. They were systematically stripping away every single asset Marcus owned to ensure that when I finally found out about the divorce, I would be thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. I picked up a stack of dirty dinner plates, my reflection catching in the dark window pane of the kitchen. I smiled at my reflection. They wanted to play a game of hidden assets and secret contracts. They wanted to see who could be the most ruthless. They had no idea that I held a $40 million loaded gun, and they had just given me the perfect excuse to pull the trigger. I cleared the rest of the dining table with practiced efficiency, while the booming laughter of Trent and Marcus echoed from the adjoining living room. I stacked the expensive china, keeping my face entirely blank. I could hear the clinking of bourbon glasses and the sound of my supposedly loving husband agreeing with every condescending remark his white brother-in-law made about my background. Before I could carry the tray to the sink, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to see Beatrice standing dangerously close, the heavy gold bracelets on her wrists rattling as she crossed her arms. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as they took in my simple silk dress. She let out a sharp, dismissive sigh that sounded loud over the running water of the kitchen faucet. "That dress is entirely inappropriate for a Caldwell family dinner, Maya," she whispered sharply, her tone laced with absolute venom. "Did you buy that off a clearance rack? You look like one of the caterers you manage." I kept my hands submerged in the warm, soapy water, forcing my muscles to relax. I did not defend my outfit. I did not point out that it was a designer piece I had bought with my own hard-earned money from a successful public relations campaign. I simply lowered my eyes, playing the exact role she desperately needed me to play. "I am sorry, Beatrice," I said softly, injecting just enough defeat into my voice to satisfy her ego. "I just wanted to be comfortable while serving dinner." Beatrice leaned in closer, her expensive perfume practically suffocating me. "You need to start understanding your place in this world, Maya. Marcus is on the verge of a massive promotion. His investment fund is reaching levels that require a certain caliber of representation. He is going to be stepping into rooms with tech billionaires and generational wealth. He needs a wife of equal status. He needs a woman whose father sits on corporate boards, not a woman who spends her days organizing balloon arches for local charity runs." She was talking about Sienna. I knew it, and she knew I did not know it. Beatrice was standing in my kitchen, drinking my wine, actively preparing me to be replaced by the blonde woman I had caught Marcus kissing just hours earlier. Beatrice was fully aware of the secret divorce. She was fully aware that Sienna was a billionaire tech heiress whose father was about to inject massive capital into Marcus's business. She was actively pushing me toward the door, trying to break my confidence so thoroughly that when Marcus finally handed me my walking papers, I would leave quietly without demanding a single dime. I looked up at my mother-in-law, widening my eyes to feign profound insecurity. "You are right, Beatrice," I said, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. "I know I do not come from your world. I just want Marcus to be happy. Whatever he needs to succeed, I will support it." A triumphant smirk spread across Beatrice's face. She patted my cheek with a condescending stiffness. "At least you know your limitations. Be a good girl and take the trash out. The smell of this kitchen is giving me a headache." She turned and marched back into the living room to rejoin the men. The second she disappeared around the corner, my expression dropped into stone-cold clarity. I wiped my hands on a towel, grabbed the heavy black trash bag, and walked out the back door into the cool Atlanta night. I tossed the bag into the bin, but I did not go back inside. Instead, I crept along the side of our massive brick house, sticking to the shadows, until I reached the tall windows of Marcus's private home office. Marcus was paranoid about his workspace. He kept the main door locked from the inside with a biometric keypad. But he was also a creature of habit. He loved smoking his expensive cigars out by the rose bushes, and he always left the side window unlatched so he could slip back in without setting off the main house alarm. I slid my fingers under the window frame, pushed it up silently, and climbed right into the lion's den. The office was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I moved straight to his sleek desktop computer. I knew he changed his password every 30 days for security, but I also knew he used the exact same formula every time. The name of his first luxury car, the current year, and a dollar sign. I typed it in rapidly. The screen unlocked, bathing my face in a bright blue light. I pulled a high-capacity flash drive from my pocket and jammed it into the USB port. My hands flew across the keyboard, bypassing his general files and digging straight into the hidden encrypted folders he kept buried under layers of fake client reports. As the progress bar on my screen began transferring gigabytes of data, I started opening individual files. What I saw made my blood run ice cold. Marcus was not just a cheating husband. He was a financial fraud on the brink of absolute ruin. The successful investment fund he constantly bragged about to Trent and Beatrice was a sinking ship. He had made catastrophic bets on commercial real estate that tanked, and his fund was currently bleeding millions. But Marcus had a plan, and the files laid it out perfectly. A folder labeled Project Sienna contained the entire blueprint. Sienna's father was not just a tech billionaire. He was looking to acquire distressed assets to offset his own tax liabilities. Marcus was essentially selling himself to Sienna's family to secure a massive financial bailout. But to make the deal work, Marcus had to look like a clean investment. I opened an email chain between Marcus and Trent. Trent, the arrogant white savior of the family, was the mastermind behind the financial shell game. Trent was using his real estate firm to help Marcus quietly transfer all the toxic, worthless debt from the investment fund into a separate holding company. Then it hit me. The sheer ruthless brilliance of his secret divorce. If Marcus had stayed married to me, marital property laws in Georgia would have dictated that we share our assets and our debts. If he had filed for a standard contested divorce, a judge would have dug into his financials, uncovered the toxic debt, and Marcus would have been forced to saddle me with millions of dollars in liabilities to save himself. But Marcus did not want a messy trial. He did not want financial discovery. I wanted a clean break so he could marry Sienna next month with zero legal attachments to his past failures. By forging my signature on the waiver of service and pushing through a secret, uncontested divorce, Marcus thought he was protecting his new clean money from me. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. He had no idea that by legally severing our ties 2 months ago, he had legally severed his right to the $40 million currently sitting in my name. His attempt to leave me destitute had actually saved me from his toxic debt and protected my entire inheritance from his greedy hands. I kept scrolling as the files copied. I found the wedding plans. Invoices for a private villa in Lake Como, Italy. Deposits for a custom bridal gown. Receipts for a $2 million engagement ring paid for using funds funneled directly from the joint savings account I had contributed to for 5 years. He was using my hard-earned public relations money to fund his Italian wedding to his billionaire mistress. The flash drive pinged, signaling the transfer was complete. I yanked it out, closed all the windows, and shut down the computer, just as I heard the heavy, muffled footsteps of Trent walking down the hallway toward the office door. I slipped back out the window, sliding it shut silently, just as the doorknob turned. I stood in the cool night air, clutching the flash drive so tightly the plastic dug into my palm. I had the debt. I had the fraud. I had the emails. I had the blueprint to completely dismantle the Caldwell family piece by piece. I walked back into the house through the kitchen door, pouring myself a fresh glass of water, acting as if I had just returned from taking out the garbage. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of fake smiles and polite nods. When Beatrice and Trent finally left, Marcus kissed me on the cheek, told me he was exhausted from work, and went straight to sleep in our bed. I lay awake next to him the entire night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold, hard metal of the flash drive hidden safely inside my pillowcase. The next morning, the Atlanta sun streamed brightly into the kitchen. I was standing at the counter brewing a pot of expensive espresso when Marcus walked in. He was freshly showered, smelling of mint and cedar, whistling a cheerful tune. He looked like a man who did not have a single care in the world. He walked over to the granite island, poured himself a cup of coffee, and set a thick manila envelope down right next to my hand. He leaned against the counter, flashing me that charming, dimpled smile that used to make my heart skip a beat. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice smooth and casual. "Trent sent over some paperwork this morning regarding the real estate portfolio. With the new promotion coming up, his legal team wants to restructure how we hold the deed to the house and a few of the investment accounts." He slid a multi-page document out of the envelope and pushed it toward me. Across the top in bold black letters, it read, "Property Agreement Contract." It was a post-nuptial agreement. Trent had drafted a document that essentially stated, "I willingly surrendered all rights to the Buckhead mansion, all claims to Marcus's investment fund, and waived my right to any future spousal support." It was the final nail in the coffin. They were trying to get me to legally sign away the house before I found out we were already divorced, ensuring I could never try to claim it as a marital asset later. Marcus picked up a sleek silver pen and held it out to me. He reached over softly, stroking my hair, his touch sending a sickening wave of revulsion down my spine. "It is just a formality to protect the company assets, baby. Sign it, and we will go to Paris this weekend." I stared at the silver pen Marcus held out to me. I let my hand hover over it, then pulled back, biting my lip to feign intense anxiety. I told him legal documents made me nervous and asked if I could at least read it over my morning coffee before putting my name on anything. Marcus checked his gold Rolex, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second before that fake dimpled smile returned to his face. He kissed my forehead, told me not to overthink it, and said he had an early morning board meeting he could not miss. The second his sports car pulled out of the driveway, I did not even look at the contract. I knew exactly what it was. I was simply waiting for his enforcers to arrive. Less than 30 minutes later, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed violently through the foyer. I opened it to find Trent and Beatrice standing on the porch. They did not wait for an invitation. Trent pushed past me, his expensive leather shoes clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. Beatrice followed, casting a look of pure disgust at the floral arrangement I had placed on the entryway table. They marched straight into the kitchen, treating my home like a distressed property they were preparing to flip for a profit. Trent slapped his briefcase onto the kitchen island right next to the property agreement Marcus had left behind. He leaned over the granite counter, invading my personal space, attempting to use his height and his loud voice to intimidate me. He launched into a rapid-fire monologue filled with aggressive legal jargon. He claimed Marcus's investment fund was undergoing a mandatory corporate restructuring. He said my boutique public relations firm was a severe financial liability, a cute little hobby that put their family assets at massive risk. He told me that if I did not sign the post-nuptial agreement immediately, The board of directors would freeze Marcus out of his upcoming promotion, and the entire Caldwell family would hold me personally responsible. Trent spoke to me with the specific, infuriating arrogance of a man who believed his whiteness and his wealth made him the smartest person in any room. He looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as an annoying obstacle he was being paid to bulldoze. Beatrice stepped forward, perfectly playing her role in their orchestrated routine. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a pristine checkbook, and quickly scribbled across a page. She tore the check out and slammed it face up onto the marble island. It was made out to me for $10,000. She looked me dead in the eye, her voice cold and entirely devoid of empathy. "Take the money, Maya," she commanded. "Take it and sign the document. Marcus is a generous man, but his patience is running incredibly thin. If you drag this out, if you try to get lawyers involved and embarrass this family, I will personally ensure you walk away with absolutely nothing. Sign the paper, take the 10,000, and go back to whatever middle-class neighborhood you came from before you ruin my son's future." I stared at the check, then at the thick legal document sitting beside it. A tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy crashed through my veins, but I kept my facial muscles locked in a mask of absolute terror. They had no idea what they were doing. By forcing me to sign a post-nuptial property agreement, they were establishing a legal contract meant for a married couple to separate their marital assets. But Marcus and I were not married. He had finalized our secret divorce 2 months ago. This piece of paper was legally worthless. It was literally void the second the ink dried on the page. But as a piece of physical evidence, it was an absolute goldmine. Trent, a licensed real estate broker, and Beatrice, the matriarch of the Caldwell family, were actively caught on my hidden home security cameras extorting me. They were committing blatant fraud and conspiring to hide assets from a marriage that had already been legally dissolved by the state of Georgia. They thought they were backing me into a corner, but they were actually handing me the exact rope they would eventually hang from. I knew I had to give them the performance of a lifetime. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. I let my shoulders slump, making myself look physically smaller and entirely defeated. I blinked rapidly until genuine tears pooled in the corners of my eyes and spilled over my cheeks. I let out a pathetic broken sob, wrapping my arms around my own stomach, as if I were in severe physical pain. I looked at Beatrice with wide, pleading eyes, begging her to tell me why Marcus was doing this, begging her to tell me what I had done wrong to deserve being thrown away. Beatrice just sneered. She crossed her arms, completely unmoved by my display of heartbreak, and pointed a manicured finger sharply at the signature line at the bottom of the page. I picked up the silver pen with a violently shaking hand. I let a single tear drop directly onto the thick parchment paper, smudging the black text slightly as I signed my name at the bottom of the final page. I dropped the pen and covered my face with my trembling hands and let out another devastating sob. I was crying loudly, but behind my hands I was smiling so hard my cheeks physically ached. Trent snatched the document off the counter so fast he nearly tore the paper in half. He inspected the signature, a triumphant, predatory smirk spreading across his pale face. He carefully slid the contract into his leather briefcase and snapped it shut. He reached out and patted my shoulder with mocking condescension. "Good girl, Maya," Trent said, his voice dripping with victory. "Pack your bags this weekend. I am sending my property managers to lock down the house and change all the security codes on Monday morning. You do not want to be here when they arrive." He grabbed his briefcase and he and Beatrice walked out the front door without saying another word, leaving the $10,000 check sitting abandoned on the counter. I wiped the fake tears from my face, my posture straightening instantly. I walked calmly to the front window in the living room and pulled the sheer curtain back just a fraction of an inch. I watched Trent stand on my driveway in the bright morning sunlight. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, dialed a number, and pressed the phone to his ear, throwing his head back and laughing loudly. I could read his lips perfectly through the glass. "It is done. The idiot signed it." I let the sheer curtain fall back into place against the window pane. I had exactly 3 hours before Marcus would inevitably send someone to change the locks, just like Trent had advised him. I walked upstairs to the sprawling master bedroom and pulled a single scuffed duffel bag from the back of the walk-in closet. I did not pack the designer gowns Marcus had purchased for me to wear to his corporate galas. I did not take the expensive jewelry Beatrice had gifted me with those backhanded compliments about how it might distract people from my unruly hair. I packed only what I had bought with my own public relations income: jeans, comfortable sweaters, my business suits, and my laptop. I left the $10,000 check sitting right there on the granite kitchen island. Taking it would imply a settlement. Leaving it meant they had simply stolen my time. I walked out the front door, feeling the heavy Georgia heat wash over me, and drove my modest sedan straight out of the gated Buckhead community. I was leaving behind a mansion, but I felt like I had just broken out of a maximum security prison. My first stop was Elias Sterling's downtown office. The air conditioning inside the high-rise building was freezing, a sharp contrast to the blistering heat outside. Elias was waiting for me in his private conference room, two thick leather-bound folders resting on the mahogany table. He poured me a glass of sparkling water and slid the first folder across the polished wood. "The wire transfers cleared an hour ago," Elias said, his voice laced with deep professional satisfaction. "The full $40 million from your uncle's estate is now legally secured inside Apex Holdings LLC. You are the sole managing director. Because the entity is completely blind, your name is nowhere on the public registry. To the outside world, Apex Holdings is just another ruthless corporate conglomerate backed by private equity." I stared at the bank statement inside the folder. A4 followed by 7 zeros. It was a staggering amount of power printed in simple black ink. I traced my finger over the numbers, thinking about how desperately Marcus was scrambling to secure a fraction of this amount by marrying Sienna. I closed the folder and looked up at Elias, sliding the encrypted flash drive across the table. I told him it was time to go shopping. I could have easily checked into the presidential suite at the Four Seasons. I could have bought a penthouse in Midtown with straight cash. Instead, I drove to a dilapidated apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of Atlanta. The paint was peeling off the exterior walls in large gray flakes, and the elevator in the lobby was permanently out of service. I rented a cramped, dimly lit studio apartment on a month-to-month lease. It smelled faintly of bleach and stale smoke. I dragged my duffel bag inside and sat down on the lumpy mattress of the furnished bed. I messed up my hair, pulling strands loose from my usually perfect bun. I wiped off my makeup until I looked completely exhausted, letting the dark circles under my eyes show clearly. I held up my phone and took a selfie, making sure the cracked paint on the wall and the cheap stained curtains behind me were perfectly visible in the frame. I opened my social media and posted the photo with a vague, melancholic caption about new beginnings being the hardest part of the journey. I knew exactly what I was doing. My career in public relations had taught me that controlling the narrative was everything. Marcus, Beatrice, Trent, and Chloe operated entirely on optics and social hierarchy. They needed to believe they had ruined me. If I disappeared quietly, they would get suspicious. If I paraded around in luxury, they would panic and investigate. But if I played the role of the broken, destitute ex-wife forced into sudden poverty, they would become so blinded by their own arrogance that they would never see the financial guillotine swinging right above their necks. The next morning, the real work began. I sat at the chipped formica table in my cheap apartment, setting up a secure video call with Elias. We pulled up the hard drive data I had copied from Marcus's home office. Marcus and Trent were desperately trying to offload millions of dollars in toxic commercial real estate debt to clean up Marcus's portfolio before his wedding to Sienna. Trent had developed several massive commercial strip malls that had completely failed, and Marcus had illegally used his clients' investment funds to finance them. Now they were bundling these bad loans and trying to sell them off to vulture funds for pennies on the dollar just to get the massive liabilities off their books. I instructed Elias to use Apex Holdings to buy it all. Every single bad loan, every defaulted commercial mortgage, every toxic asset Trent had bundled for Marcus. Elias executed the trades through a labyrinth of proxy buyers and shell companies. We bought their debt at an incredible discount because they were absolutely desperate to liquidate. Trent and Marcus thought they were dumping their financial garbage on some nameless overseas investment firm. They thought they were clearing their ledgers and saving themselves from federal fraud investigations. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed the total sum of their financial liabilities directly to me. I was no longer just the woman they threw away. I was now their primary creditor. I literally owned their debt, which meant I owned their entire future. By late afternoon, Elias confirmed the final transaction had cleared the banking system. Apex Holdings now controlled 51% of Trent's outstanding commercial liabilities. One simple demand for immediate payment, and his entire arrogant real estate empire would crumble into dust, taking Marcus's investment fund down, right along with it. I leaned back in my cheap plastic chair, taking a sip of instant coffee, feeling a level of satisfaction that no expensive champagne could ever match. I had the power to destroy them with a single phone call, but I was not going to make it easy for them. I wanted them to climb to the very top of their social pedestal before I kicked the ladder out from under them. My phone buzzed on this table, vibrating against the cheap Formica. I picked it up to see a notification from my social media account. My miserable-looking selfie from the day before had gained a massive amount of traction. People from my old public relations circles were leaving sympathetic comments asking if I was okay, offering to take me out for drinks to talk. But one comment stood out at the very top of the feed, pinned by its sheer malicious audacity. It was from Chloe, Marcus's spoiled sister and Trent's entitled wife. She had commented publicly, ensuring that every single person in our Atlanta social circle would see her words. "Oh my God," she wrote, adding a fake crying emoji. "Heard you and Marcus officially separated. That apartment looks absolutely awful. Let me know if you need me to cash app you some lunch money." The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Botanical Garden was a sea of glittering crystal and deep floral arrangements. I stood near the main entrance holding a digital tablet, directing the catering staff with precise instructions. As the lead public relations coordinator for this elite charity auction, my job was to remain entirely invisible while ensuring the city's wealthiest donors had a flawless evening. I was wearing a crisp, tailored white silk blouse and black trousers, blending in perfectly with the professional background. Then the heavy oak doors swung open, and the entire Caldwell family made their grand entrance. Beatrice led the charge, dripping in ostentatious gold jewelry and acting as if she personally owned the venue. Chloe and Trent followed closely behind her. But it was the couple bringing up the rear that made the air freeze in my lungs. Marcus walked into the ballroom wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, his arm wrapped protectively around the waist of a stunningly beautiful white woman. It was Sienna. She was wearing a clinging emerald green designer gown that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. More importantly, the tight fabric proudly displayed a very distinct, undeniable 3-month baby bump. Sienna rested her hand over her stomach, laughing at something Marcus whispered in her ear. He had not just replaced me. He had gotten his wealthy white mistress pregnant while he was still sleeping in my bed, eating the dinners I cooked and acting like my devoted husband. The sheer breathtaking audacity of parading his pregnant fiancée at a high society event in Atlanta while I was still legally fighting to catch my breath was staggering. He was putting his new upgraded life on public display, completely confident that I was too poor and too broken to ever do anything about it. I did not break my professional composure. I simply tapped my tablet, instructing a waiter to take a tray of champagne to the newly arrived guests. But the moment Marcus looked up and made eye contact with me across the crowded ballroom, all the blood drained from his face. His charismatic smile vanished instantly. He leaned down, whispered something hurried to Sienna, and quickly detached himself from her side. Marcus marched straight toward me, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched near his temple. He did not say a word. He simply grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin with bruising force, and practically dragged me behind the heavy velvet curtains that shielded the catering preparation area from the main floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus hissed, his voice a furious, panicked whisper. "You are supposed to be hiding out in that pathetic little apartment you rented. Did you stalk me? Are you trying to cause a scene and humiliate my family in front of the mayor?" I pulled my arm out of his grip, smoothing the sleeve of my white silk blouse. "I am working, Marcus. This charity auction is managed by my public relations firm. I was hired for this event 6 months ago. You know this." Marcus ran a hand over his face, pacing like a trapped animal in the narrow space between the stainless steel catering tables. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He shoved it roughly against my chest, forcing me to take it. "There is $5,000 in cash in there." Marcus said, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "Take it and leave through the loading dock right now. Pay one of your little assistants to manage the rest of the night. Sienna is very hormonal right now, and she is extremely sensitive to stress. If she sees you walking around here looking like a desperate abandoned ex-wife, it will completely ruin her evening. I am not going to let you sabotage my future just because you are bitter that I traded up." He actually believed his own narrative. He genuinely believed that his pregnant billionaire heiress fiancée needed to be protected from the sight of the woman he had actively betrayed and defrauded. He thought he could buy my dignity with $5,000 of the very money he was actively trying to hide from his own creditors. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. I felt the familiar urge to scream, to slap him across the face, to march right out onto that ballroom floor and announce to the entire city of Atlanta exactly what kind of monster he was. But a predator does not bark before it bites. I smiled. A soft, chillingly calm smile that made Marcus take a highly uncertain step backward. I placed the envelope gently down onto a silver serving tray full of discarded cocktail napkins. "I have a professional contract to fulfill tonight, Marcus," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I do not abandon my obligations just because the work gets a little uncomfortable. You can keep your money. I have a feeling you are going to need every single penny of it very soon." I turned my back on him and pushed through the velvet curtains, stepping back out into the brilliant light of the ballroom. I walked straight toward the silent auction tables to check the bid sheets deliberately, ignoring the furious glare Marcus was burning into the back of my head. I had only been back on the floor for 3 minutes when Trent decided it was his turn to play the enforcer. I was standing near a massive floral centerpiece, adjusting the lighting on a charity display. I saw Trent walking purposefully toward me from the corner of my eye. He was holding a large brimming crystal goblet of dark red wine. He did not slow down. He did not deviate his path. Trent walked directly into me, intentionally slamming his shoulder into mine with enough force to knock me off balance. With a loud theatrical gasp, Trent jerked his wrist, throwing the entire contents of his wineglass directly onto my chest. The dark red liquid splashed violently across my crisp white silk blouse, soaking instantly through the expensive fabric and leaving a massive, humiliating stain right across my heart. "Oh, my deepest apologies," Trent said, his voice booming loudly enough to draw the attention of several wealthy donors nearby. He looked me up and down, a cruel, satisfied smirk, twisting his pale features. "Watch where you are going, waitress. It is getting a bit too crowded in here for the hired help to be wandering around aimlessly." A few feet away, I saw Beatrice and Chloe standing near the champagne fountain. They were not even trying to hide their amusement. Chloe actually raised her glass toward Trent in a silent toast, laughing openly at my public degradation. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to run out of the venue crying, proving to everyone in their elite circle that I was weak, unprofessional, and entirely unworthy of the space I occupied. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not even raise my voice. I reached out and calmly took a clean linen napkin from a passing server's tray. I dabbed gently at the ruined silk of my blouse, maintaining perfect, unshakable eye contact with Trent the entire time. He shifted his weight, his smirk faltering just a fraction, as he realized I was not giving him the hysterical reaction he so desperately craved. "You should be more careful with your beverages, Trent," I said, my tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather. "Spilling things so recklessly is a terrible habit. You never know when a careless mess might end up costing you everything you own." Trent scoffed, rolling his eyes and muttering a racial microaggression under his breath before turning on his heel to strut back toward Marcus and his pregnant mistress. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully put the poor, discarded woman back in her place. Right at that exact second, my cell phone vibrated violently in the pocket of my black trousers. I pulled the phone out, still dabbing at the wine stain on my chest. The screen illuminated with a secure text message from my lawyer, Elias Sterling. I opened the message and read the single sentence that officially sealed the destruction of the Caldwell family. 51% acquisition of Trent's real estate holding company is officially complete, Elias wrote. The transfer cleared the Federal Registry 2 minutes ago. We are now their biggest creditor. You own them. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I looked across the sparkling ballroom at Trent, who was currently laughing loudly and slapping Marcus on the back. I looked at Beatrice, who was proudly introducing Sienna to the mayor's wife. I looked at Marcus, who was smiling at his pregnant mistress, completely convinced that his financial fraud had successfully secured his future. They were drinking premium champagne and celebrating their perceived victory. They had absolutely no idea that the woman standing across the room in a ruined wine-stained shirt was no longer their victim. I was the silent executioner who had just legally purchased the very ground they were standing on. The morning after the Botanical Garden Gala, I sat at the wobbly Formica table in my rundown studio apartment. The peeling wallpaper and stained carpet provided the perfect camouflage for the absolute financial massacre I was currently orchestrating on my laptop. The notification from Elias the night before was just the beginning. Now it was time to watch the poison work its way through the Caldwell family's bloodstream. Elias was on a secure video call with me, sharing his screen. He pulled up the live financial ledgers for Trent's real estate development firm. Through Apex Holdings, my anonymous company, I was now the legal owner of over half of Trent's commercial debt. I gave Elias the green light to invoke the acceleration clauses on every single loan we had acquired. In the corporate finance world, an acceleration clause allows the lender to demand immediate, full repayment of a loan if the borrower shows signs of severe insolvency. Because Trent had built his entire empire on a house of cards, using Marcus's hidden funds to artificially inflate his portfolio, he was legally entirely exposed. Within minutes, the automated demands for repayment hit Trent's corporate servers. Because I still had the cloned hard drive and the backdoors I had installed through Marcus's home office network, I had a front row seat to their internal communications. I watched their digital correspondence devolve from arrogant congratulations into outright panic in real time. Trent sent an email to Marcus marked with high importance. The subject line was just a string of panicked question marks. He demanded Marcus immediately wire back the millions of dollars they had parked in the offshore accounts. Trent needed massive instant liquidity to satisfy the margin calls that Apex Holdings was aggressively triggering. He wrote that if he did not show the bank a massive cash injection by the end of the business day, his entire commercial development portfolio would be seized and liquidated. The arrogant white savior who constantly bragged about carrying the Caldwell family legacy was suddenly begging for a financial bailout from the very black family he condescended to at every dinner party. I took a sip of my instant coffee, waiting for Marcus to respond. It took less than 10 minutes. Marcus replied with a frantic, hostile email completely denying the request. Marcus typed furiously that his own flagship investment fund was currently experiencing a hostile anonymous takeover. Someone was systematically snatching up all his outstanding debt and shorting his remaining viable assets. Marcus was bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate. He explicitly stated that he could not touch the offshore money because he needed it as collateral to secure his upcoming marriage to Sienna. Sienna's billionaire father was expecting to see a clean, robust balance sheet before he injected any capital into Marcus's firm. If Marcus wired that hidden money back to Trent, the offshore accounts would flag, Sienna's father would run an audit, and the wedding would be canceled instantly. Marcus threw Trent straight under the bus to save himself. He told his brother-in-law that they were strictly on their own and ordered him to handle his own mess without exposing the family. I smiled, watching the thieves violently turn on each other the second their stolen money was threatened. The impenetrable alliance between Marcus and Trent was shattering exactly as I had designed. But I was not finished. A predator does not just wound its prey and walk away. I unmuted my microphone and gave Elias my next instruction. I told him to contact the major banking institutions holding Trent's operational credit lines. Operating as the majority debt holder, Apex Holdings had the legal authority to flag Trent's real estate firm for extreme insolvency risk. I wanted his access to fast cash completely eradicated. Elias executed the command with surgical precision. The financial freeze rippled through Trent's company like a paralyzing shockwave. I watched the live alerts pop up on my screen. Trent's corporate credit cards began declining. His accounts payable department was locked out of the banking portals. His active construction sites across Atlanta were instantly halted because the automated payments to his contractors bounced. His entire liquidity dried up in less than an hour. Howe was officially drowning, and Marcus had just refused to throw him a life preserver. Desperation breeds severe paranoia. As Trent watched his accounts freeze one by one, he needed a scapegoat. He needed to figure out how a massive anonymous private equity firm had magically acquired his highly classified debt portfolio overnight. He knew his internal books were locked down tight. The only place those specific incriminating financial records existed outside of his own office was on the heavily encrypted computer inside Marcus's house. I watched the realization hit Trent through a furious profanity-laced text message he sent to Marcus. Trent demanded to know who had been inside the home office. Marcus replied that the room was strictly off-limits, but then Marcus made a fatal error. He texted Trent that the only person who had been anywhere near the house before the financial leak was his broke, bitter, recently evicted ex-wife. Trent put the pieces together in entirely the wrong way. He did not possess the imagination to realize I was the billionaire CEO buying his debt. His ingrained arrogance and racial bias made him automatically assume I was just a petty, disgruntled woman who had managed to steal a flash drive out of spite. Trent convinced himself that I had stolen his accounting books and sold them to a rival corporate firm for a quick payday just to hurt the family. I thought I was a desperate snitch looking for pocket change. He had absolutely no idea he was dealing with the architect of his total destruction. I saw the final message Trent sent to Marcus. I am going to handle your trash right now. I closed my laptop and set it on the kitchen counter. I knew exactly what was coming next. I walked over to the small, cracked mirror hanging in the hallway of my cheap apartment. I pulled my hair into a messy, uneven bun. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated, ensuring I looked like a woman who had been crying all morning over her ruined life. I sat down on the faded floral sofa, picked up a cheap fashion magazine, and waited. The violent pounding on the door started exactly 20 minutes later. It was not a normal knock. It was the sound of heavy fists hammering against cheap wood, shaking the door inside its frame. The metal hinges rattled aggressively. "Open the door, Maya. I know you are in there." Trent's voice echoed through the rundown, empty hallway of the apartment complex. He was screaming, completely abandoning the polished high society persona he maintained at Beatrice's dinner parties. He sounded unhinged, feral, and incredibly dangerous. He kicked the bottom of the door with his heavy leather shoe, making the deadbolt groan under the pressure. I sat perfectly still on the sofa, my heart rate steady and calm. I did not say a word. "Open this door right now before I break it off the hinges," Trent roared, pounding his fists against the wood again. "You think you are so smart. You think you can steal my files and sell me out to private equity. I am going to ruin you. I will have my lawyers tie you up in court until you are begging on the street. Open the door." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the thin wooden door open just as Trent raised his fist to strike it again. He stumbled forward, his face flushed a dark, angry red. But he was not alone. Standing directly behind him in the dingy, flickering light of the apartment hallway was Beatrice. She was wearing a pristine white designer suit, clutching a silk handkerchief over her nose, as if the very air in my building might infect her with poverty. Beatrice did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past Trent and stepped right into my cramped studio. Her eyes swept over the stained carpet, the sagging sofa, and the chipped formica table. I saw a flash of supreme satisfaction cross her face. She truly believed her son had broken me. She believed this squalor was exactly what I deserved for failing to meet her elite societal standards. Trent slammed the door shut behind them. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. He started screaming that I had stolen his financial ledgers. He accused me of hacking his servers and selling his proprietary data to a rival private equity firm. He was sweating through his custom shirt, completely unhinged by the financial ruin currently choking his real estate empire. Beatrice held up a single manicured hand. Trent instantly fell silent. Even in his panic, the entitled son-in-law knew better than to cross the matriarch of the Caldwell family. Beatrice approached my small kitchen table and dropped a crisp manila folder onto the scratched surface. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a thick checkbook, and clicked a gold pen. We do not have time for your usual theatrics, Maya Beatrice said, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. The rumors surrounding your little separation from Marcus are becoming a nuisance. Sienna's father is a very traditional man. He does not like scandal. He certainly does not like hearing whispers that his future son-in-law might have abandoned a destitute wife. It makes Marcus look financially irresponsible and morally questionable. She opened the folder and slid a typed 2-page document toward me. This is a public statement drafted by my family's crisis management team, Beatrice explained smoothly. You are going to post this on all of your social media platforms immediately. You are going to send it to the local society blogs. In this statement, you take full responsibility for the failure of the marriage. You will confess that you were financially reckless, deeply unstable, and that you engaged in multiple extramarital affairs. You will state that Marcus tried everything to save you, but he ultimately had to walk away for his own well-being. I looked down at the paper. They were not just asking me to disappear. They were demanding I permanently destroy my own professional reputation to pave the way for Marcus's billionaire wedding. They wanted me to publicly brand myself as a toxic, cheating failure, so Marcus could play the role of the tragic, long-suffering hero. Beatrice uncapped her gold pen and wrote out a check. She ripped it from the ledger and placed it squarely on top of the fake confession. That is a cashier's check for $50,000, Beatrice said, lifting her chin. It is more money than a girl from your background has ever seen at one time. Take the money, Maya. Post the statement. If you do this, I will make sure Marcus does not sue you for stealing Trent's data. If you refuse, Trent will have you arrested for corporate espionage before the sun sets. Trent puffed out his chest, stepping closer to me to reinforce the threat. You hear that? You take the deal or I will personally make sure you spend the next 10 years in a federal prison. They thought they had me perfectly cornered. They thought $50,000 and an empty legal threat would make me completely surrender. I did not look at the check. I did not look at the fake confession. I slowly reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, opened my voice memo application, and pressed the bright red record button. I placed the phone face up on the table right next to Beatrice's bribe. Let me make sure I understand the terms of this arrangement perfectly, I said, making sure to project my voice clearly for the microphone. You, Beatrice Caldwell, and you, Trent, are sitting in my home offering me a $50,000 bribe. You are demanding I publish a fraudulent public statement to cover up a highly classified corporate embezzlement scheme. Beatrice frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in confusion. What are you talking about? Turn that device off right now. I ignored her, leaning closer to the phone. You want me to tell the media I was financially reckless so nobody looks into Marcus's investment fund. You are paying me to hide the fact that Marcus illegally funneled millions of dollars of his clients' investment money through Trent's failing real estate company. But most importantly, you are bribing me to cover up the fact that Marcus used those exact stolen corporate funds to purchase a $2 million engagement ring for his pregnant mistress, Sienna. The color drained out of Beatrice's face so fast she looked like a ghost. Her jaw dropped open. She stared at me in sheer, absolute horror. She knew Marcus was marrying Sienna for the bailout money, but she clearly had no idea he had stolen from his own clients to buy the engagement ring. She had no idea the federal crimes were that deep. Trent, however, did not freeze. Trent realized instantly that I was not guessing. I knew exact numbers. I knew the exact flow of the stolen money. He realized that the person who had bought his debt earlier that morning was not some random corporate firm. It was me, you miserable lying traitor, Trent roared. He lost his mind completely. The arrogant, composed real estate mogul vanished, replaced by a violent, cornered animal. He lunged across the small formica table, his massive hand raised high, aiming a brutal closed fist directly at my face. He intended to knock me out and take my phone. I did not even flinch. I did not step back. Before Trent's hand could come anywhere near my face, the hollow core door to my cramped bedroom violently kicked open. Two towering men dressed in identical, impeccably tailored black suits exploded into the living room. Elias Sterling had insisted on sending private security to shadow me the second the $40 million cleared my account. He knew desperate men did desperate things. The first bodyguard caught Trent's swinging arm in midair. He gripped Trent's wrist with bone-crushing force and twisted it sharply backward. Trent let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute agony as his shoulder popped loudly out of its socket. The second bodyguard grabbed the back of Trent's expensive collar and the belt loop of his tailored trousers, with flawless, terrifying synchronization. The two massive security professionals lifted the thrashing, screaming real estate developer entirely off his feet. They marched him straight toward the open front door and quite literally threw him out of my apartment. Trent crashed hard onto the concrete floor of the hallway, sliding several feet before slamming into the opposite wall. Beatrice let out a terrified scream, clutching her designer handbag to her chest. She backed away from the table, her eyes darting between me and the two giant men currently blocking her exit. She was trembling so violently, the gold bracelets on her wrists clanked together. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the audio file to a secure cloud server. I picked up the $50,000 check and the fake confession. I walked slowly over to Beatrice, who was now backed into a corner of the dingy studio. I tucked the check and the paper directly into the front pocket of her pristine white jacket. "You can keep your pocket change, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and lethal. "You are going to need it to pay for Trent's medical bills and Marcus's criminal defense attorney. Now get out of my apartment before I have my men throw you down the stairs." Beatrice did not say a single word. She scrambled out the door, her heels clicking frantically as she ran toward Trent, who was currently groaning in pain on the dirty hallway floor. I stepped into the doorway and looked down at them both. "Oh, and Trent," I called out smoothly. "Check your email. Your corporate bank accounts have just been permanently frozen. Have a wonderful afternoon." The sound of Trent hitting the hallway floor and Beatrice scrambling away in her designer heels was the perfect symphony to end my afternoon. I locked the cheap wooden door of my decoy apartment for the final time. My phone immediately rang. It was Elias. He confirmed that Trent's corporate accounts were officially frozen. But Elias had more pressing news. Despite the financial bloodbath happening behind closed doors, Marcus was refusing to cancel the upcoming Caldwell Family Investment Fund 30th Anniversary Gala. The gala was scheduled for the following evening at the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown Atlanta. For 3 decades, this event had been the crown jewel of the Caldwell family calendar, a night where the Black elite of Atlanta gathered to celebrate generational wealth. But this year, Marcus was using it as a desperate life raft. Elias's network of informants revealed that Marcus had hired extra security and invited every major tech investor in the city. His plan was sickeningly transparent. Marcus was going to use the 30-year legacy of his family's fund as a glittering stage to publicly propose to Sienna. He intended to trap her billionaire father into a public alliance, forcing the man to inject capital into the Caldwell Fund to save his future son-in-law from public embarrassment. Marcus thought he could just smile, hand Sienna a $2 million ring bought with stolen money, and magically erase his impending federal crimes. I thought he was still the smartest man in the room. He needed a reminder that he was no longer playing the game, he was the prey. I told Elias it was time to formally introduce Apex Holdings to the Caldwell family. I did not want an email. I did not want a legal notice. I wanted pure, undeniable psychological warfare. Within the hour, a delivery arrived at the glass double doors of Marcus's executive suite in the financial district. It was not a standard corporate gift. It was a massive 6-foot-tall funeral wreath. It was composed entirely of black roses, wilted orchids, and dark, poisonous-looking ivy. It was the kind of floral arrangement reserved for the death of an empire. The delivery men placed it directly in the center of Marcus's reception area, right where every one of his remaining panicked employees could see it. Tucked into the center of the black roses was a single thick ivory card edged in gold foil. I knew exactly what the card said because I had dictated it to Elias word for word. It read, "I will see you at the gala tomorrow night. Please have your stage prepared. It is time to transfer power." Signed, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings. Through the back doors I had installed on his network, I watched the absolute chaos that funeral wreath unleashed. Marcus completely lost his grip on reality. The security cameras in his office showed him violently kicking his heavy mahogany desk, screaming at his assistants to get the flowers out of his sight. He was already terrified because his mother had just called him sobbing hysterically about the audio recording I held, and his brother-in-law was currently sitting in an emergency room with a dislocated shoulder and a bankrupt company. Now the anonymous corporate entity that held all his debt was threatening to crash his engagement party. Marcus spent the next 10 hours burning through his last remaining shreds of capital. I tracked his outgoing calls and wire transfers. He hired 3 different private investigation firms. He contacted corporate espionage experts. He paid exorbitant, desperate fees trying to unmask the identity of the Apex Holdings CEO. He needed a name. He needed a face. He needed to know who was coming to destroy him at the Four Seasons. But Elias was a master of his craft. The LLC was buried under so many layers of blind trusts and offshore proxies that Marcus's expensive investigators hit a brick wall at every turn. Marcus was left swinging blindly in the dark, absolutely terrified of an enemy he could not see. He sent out an emergency memo to his event staff ordering them to double the security at the hotel doors and to deny entry to anyone not on the pre-approved guest list. He thought a few men with earpieces could stop a hostile takeover. As the sun set over Atlanta the night before the gala, I packed up my laptop. I did not need to sleep in the rundown studio apartment anymore. The charade of the broken, destitute ex-wife had served its purpose perfectly. I walked out of the peeling building, got into a private car Elias had sent, and told the driver to take me home. I was not talking about the house in Buckhead. I was talking about the property I had purchased entirely in cash the day the $40 million cleared my account. The car pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper in the most exclusive zip code in the city. The private elevator whisked me up to the top floor, opening directly into a massive, breathtaking penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, glittering view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The marble floors gleamed, and the crystal chandeliers cast a warm, powerful glow over the modern custom furniture. This was my sanctuary. This was the fortress I had built with my uncle's legacy. I walked into the master suite where my stylist had already been at work. Hanging on a velvet mannequin in the center of the massive walk-in closet was my armor for the following night. It was a custom haute couture evening gown. The silk was a deep, dangerous shade of crimson, the exact color of spilled blood. The bodice was structured and sharp, encrusted with hundreds of tiny, flawless red diamonds that caught the light like fire. It was not a dress meant for a supportive wife. It was a dress meant for a conqueror. Resting on the vanity, next to the dress was a velvet jewelry box containing a spectacular diamond collar necklace, a piece salvaged from my uncle's most prized collection. I stepped in front of the massive gilded mirror covering the far wall of the bedroom. I looked at the woman reflecting back at me. The tired, anxious girl who used to shrink under Beatrice's insults was completely gone. The desperate woman who had signed a fake contract in her kitchen was dead. Standing there was the sole managing director of a ruthless financial empire. I traced my fingers over the cold, sparkling diamonds on the red silk dress. I thought about Marcus, currently sweating in his office, terrified of the phantom CEO coming to take his throne. I thought about Sienna practicing her surprised face for a proposal funded by stolen money. I smiled, a slow, predatory curve of my lips that reached all the way to my eyes. It is time to show them what $40 million looks like. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown Atlanta was a suffocating display of generational wealth and desperate performance. The Caldwell family had pulled out all the stops for the 30th anniversary of their investment fund. Towering centerpieces of white orchids brushed the crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne. The room was packed with the city's black elite. Judges, real estate moguls, tech investors, and local politicians were all mingling, completely unaware that they were standing inside a financial slaughterhouse. I stood in the darkened vestibule just outside the main ballroom doors, listening to the muffled sound of the jazz band fading away. The program had reached its climax. Through the slight crack in the heavy oak doors, I could see Marcus standing on the brightly lit stage. He was sweating right through his custom tuxedo, though he masked it with his trademark charismatic smile. He held a microphone in one hand, delivering a passionate, entirely fabricated speech about the Caldwell legacy of integrity and financial stewardship. Standing right beside him on the stage was Sienna. She wore a clinging silver gown that proudly displayed her 3-month baby bump. She was glowing, playing the role of the blushing billionaire heiress to absolute perfection. In the front row, Beatrice sat with her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance every few seconds. She was terrified that the anonymous CEO who sent the black funeral wreath would suddenly materialize and ruin her son's bailout. Trent sat next to her, his right arm bound in a heavy medical sling from where my bodyguard had dislocated his shoulder the day before. He was drinking heavily, his face pale and slick with anxious sweat. Marcus raised his free hand, signaling for the room to quiet down. He looked out at the sea of wealthy investors, specifically locking eyes with Sienna's billionaire father, who sat at a VIP table near the front. Marcus announced that the Caldwell Fund was not just celebrating 30 years of the past, but securing the promise of the future. He turned to Sienna, his voice dropping into a smooth, practiced cadence of devotion. He reached his hand into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket, his fingers wrapping around the velvet box containing the $2 million engagement ring he had bought with stolen corporate funds. He was about to drop to one knee. He was about to seal his fraudulent alliance and save his empire. I gave a sharp nod to the two towering security guards flanking the entrance. They grabbed the brass handles of the massive oak doors and shoved them open with staggering force. The heavy doors slammed against the wall with a thunderous echo that cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. The entire room went dead silent. Hundreds of heads snapped toward the entrance simultaneously. I stepped into the brilliant, blinding light of the ballroom. I did not walk, I glided. The custom crimson silk gown flowed around me like liquid fire, the sharp, structured bodice gripping my waist. The hundreds of flawless red diamonds encrusted into the fabric caught the light of the chandeliers, throwing blinding flashes of crimson across the walls. The heavy antique diamond collar necklace resting against my collarbone radiated absolute untouchable wealth. I held my head high, my posture radiating the chilling, supreme confidence of a woman who literally owned the building they were standing in. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Whispers broke out instantly, spreading like wildfire across the tables. They recognized me. They knew I was Maya, the supposedly discarded middle-class wife who organized charity events. But the woman standing before them did not look like a public relations assistant. She looked like an empress. The sheer financial magnitude of the couture gown and the heirloom diamonds practically screamed power. On the stage, Marcus froze completely. The velvet ring box slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the polished wooden stage with a hollow thud that echoed through the silent microphone he was still clutching. His charismatic smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked as if a ghost had just walked into his funeral. Sienna blinked in confusion, looking from the dropped ring box to my face, entirely unsure of what was happening. In the front row, Beatrice dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, but she did not even flinch. She was staring at the diamonds around my neck, recognizing instantly that I was wearing wealth that vastly eclipsed her entire family's net worth. Trent shrank down in his chair, instinctively gripping his injured shoulder, terrified that my bodyguards were lurking somewhere in the shadows. But it was Chloe who broke the silence. Chloe could not handle the shift in power. Her ingrained arrogance overrode whatever survival instincts she possessed. She leaped up from her chair in the second row, her face contorted with vicious indignation. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me, her voice shrill and echoing across the quiet ballroom. "Security!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "Get security right now! Who let this broke, pathetic woman in here? She is not on the guest list. She lives in a slum. Throw her out into the street before she ruins my brother's engagement." Her outburst hung in the air, nasty and desperate. 4 burly hotel security guards in dark suits immediately detached themselves from the perimeter walls and marched swiftly toward me. The crowd parted nervously, anticipating a humiliating physical altercation. The guards formed a tight semicircle in front of me, their lead officer holding up a stern hand to block my path. He politely but firmly informed me that this was a private corporate event and asked me to exit the premises immediately to avoid an arrest for trespassing. I did not step back. I did not raise my voice. I did not even look at Chloe, who was currently smirking in the audience, thrilled that she was about to watch me be publicly dragged out of the Four Seasons. I calmly unclasped my small diamond-encrusted clutch. I reached 2 fingers inside and pulled out a single thick card. It was not a paper invitation. It was a solid, heavy card crafted entirely from matte black titanium edged in pure gold. It was a proprietary access key, an item so exclusive that only the highest-ranking financial executives in the country even knew it existed. It was the master credential issued directly by the Federal Reserve to the singular majority debt holder of a registered financial institution. I held the heavy black and gold card up, holding it perfectly still between 2 fingers, right in front of the lead security officer's face. The officer's eyes locked onto the gold microchip embedded in the titanium. He looked at the embossed insignia of Apex Holdings. He knew exactly what that card meant. He knew that the person holding that card was not a trespasser. The person holding that card was the apex predator of the corporate food chain, the supreme financial authority who held the power to liquidate the very event he was currently guarding. The color drained from the officer's face. His aggressive posture melted instantly. He swallowed hard, took a quick, panicked step backward, and violently grabbed the shoulders of the guard standing next to him, physically shoving them out of the way. "Stand down." The lead officer barked to his men, his voice carrying a distinct tone of panic. I said, "Stand down immediately." To the absolute shock of everyone in the room, the lead officer turned back to me and bowed at the waist. It was a deep, deferential bow of total submission. He extended his arm toward the stage, gesturing for me to proceed. The other guards immediately flanked me, not as enforcers, but as an honor guard forming a protective barrier between me and the stunned audience. Chloe's jaw dropped open so wide she looked absurd. Her face flushed a violent blotchy red as she watched the security team she had just commanded bow down to the woman she had just called a broke slum dweller. Beatrice sank back into her chair, pressing her trembling hands over her mouth, realizing with absolute horrifying clarity that the anonymous CEO who sent the black funeral wreath was the very daughter-in-law she had spent 5 years trying to destroy. I stepped forward, my crimson silk dress trailing across the marble floor like a river of blood. The crowd parted before me without me having to say a single word. The wealthiest, most powerful people in Atlanta backed away, staring at me in total silence as I walked straight down the center aisle. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead. I reached the wooden stairs leading up to the stage. I ascended them slowly, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing through the silent ballroom. I walked right past Sienna, who was clutching her stomach and staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I did not stop until I was standing dead center on the stage, less than 2 feet away from Marcus. Marcus was trembling. He was sweating so profusely his custom shirt was clinging to his chest. He looked down at the titanium gold card still resting between my fingers, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. He was looking at his executioner. I smiled at him, a warm, bright, absolutely lethal smile, and I reached out my hand to take the microphone. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the microphone and pulled it smoothly from the stand. The high-pitched whine of audio feedback briefly pierced the heavy silence of the ballroom. Before I could even raise the microphone to my lips, the sound of heavy dress shoes stomping against the marble floor broke the tension. Trent had lost his mind. His fragile ego could not process the sight of me standing above him, dripping in wealth and commanding the room. Despite his arm being heavily strapped in a medical sling, he charged toward the wooden steps of the stage. His face was a mask of pure, unhinged fury. He intended to physically drag me down by my dress, determined to put the black woman he so deeply despised back into what he believed was her rightful place. I did not take a single step backward. I did not even blink. I simply raised 2 fingers of my free hand. The lead security officer, who had bowed to me moments earlier, lunged forward with terrifying speed. He intercepted Trent right at the base of the stairs, driving his forearm squarely into Trent's chest. Trent gagged as all the air was forced from his lungs. 2 more guards instantly flanked him, gripping his uninjured arm and pinning him roughly against the edge of the stage. Trent thrashed like a wild animal, sputtering threats under his breath, but he was completely immobilized. From the shadows of the vestibule, Elias Sterling stepped into the brilliant light of the chandeliers. My attorney looked immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a thick stack of heavy embossed legal folders. He walked with the calm, measured pace of a man bringing a loaded gun to a knife fight. Elias completely ignored Marcus and Beatrice. He walked straight past the Caldwell family and headed directly for the VIP tables where the board of directors and Sienna's billionaire father were seated. Elias systematically dropped a heavy folder in front of each prominent investor. The folders landed on the crisp white tablecloths with a series of dull, final thuds. I lifted the microphone. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, steady, resonant, and dripping with absolute authority. "Good evening, members of the board, esteemed investors, and distinguished guests," I said, my gaze sweeping over the hundreds of terrified faces looking up at me. "Allow me to formally reintroduce myself. I am not standing before you tonight as the discarded, naive wife of Marcus Caldwell. I am standing here as the sole managing director of Apex Holdings. And as of yesterday morning, I am the absolute largest creditor of the entire Caldwell family empire." A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. I saw prominent judges and real estate moguls leaning forward, their eyes darting between me and the legal folders Elias had just distributed. I turned my body slightly, looking down at Trent, where the security guards had him pinned against the stage. "Trent." I spoke his name like a death sentence. "You spent years masquerading as the white savior of this family's legacy. You thought you could use my husband's investment fund to illegally finance your failing commercial properties while you mocked the very people funding your lifestyle. You bundled your toxic debt and tried to dump it blindly into the market to save yourself. You sold it to me. Because of your fraudulent shell game, your real estate firm has officially been liquidated by federal regulators as of 8 o'clock this morning. You are entirely bankrupt." Trent stopped struggling. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. He slumped against the security guards, his arrogant facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces. In the second row, Chloe buried her face in her hands and began to sob uncontrollably, realizing her lavish lifestyle had just evaporated. I slowly turned my attention to Marcus. He was standing less than 3 feet away from me, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. And Marcus. I stepped closer to him, my heels clicking sharply against the wooden stage. "You took your client's hard-earned money to buy a $2 million diamond for your mistress. You manipulated your own corporate ledgers to secure a bailout from a man you intended to deceive. You thought you could hide your massive liabilities and walk away clean. But you sold your debt to the exact same anonymous buyer Trent did. Your entire flagship fund now belongs to Apex Holdings. I own every single asset you thought you were hiding. I own your company. I own your future. You have absolutely nothing left." At the VIP table, Sienna's father abruptly stood up. He had opened the folder Elias gave him. He was staring at the highlighted bank transfers, the internal emails between Marcus and Trent, and the irrefutable proof of the massive financial fraud Marcus was using to trap his daughter. The billionaire patriarch looked at Marcus with a level of disgust and hatred that could have frozen boiling water. He pointed a trembling finger at the stage. "You miserable lying thief!" Sienna's father roared, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You tried to use my daughter to pay off your criminal debts. I will see you rot in federal prison for the rest of your natural life." Sienna, who was standing completely frozen near the edge of the stage, looked from her furious father to Marcus. The beautiful glowing illusion of her perfect engagement had just been violently slaughtered. She looked down at the velvet box resting on the floor, the box that held a ring bought with stolen money. The realization hit her with physical force. Her hands began to shake violently. The crystal champagne flute Sienna had been holding slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered into dozens of jagged, glittering pieces. The sharp sound of breaking glass broke the spell that had paralyzed Marcus. He had lost his investors. He had lost his bailout. He had lost his company. But Marcus Caldwell's ego was a terrifying delusional machine. He could not accept that the woman he had treated like garbage for years had orchestrated his total destruction. He refused to believe he had been outsmarted. Desperation morphed into a wild, feral rage. Marcus lunged forward, ignoring the shattered pieces of his life. He pointed frantically at the heavy diamond collar resting against my neck, his chest heaving as he screamed into the microphone I was holding. "You are out of your mind!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. "You are completely delusional. I do not care what imaginary company you created. I do not care where you got those diamonds, or how you got your hands on that kind of money. You are my wife. We are legally married. Under Georgia law, every single asset you own is marital property. You have to split every penny of that fortune with me 50-50. I stared at the man I had loved for 5 years. The man who had mocked my background stolen from his clients and planned to throw me out onto the street. He was panting heavily, his eyes wild with a sickening mixture of greed and desperation. He honestly believed that the law he had tried to manipulate was now going to be his ultimate salvation. He thought the legal bonds of our marriage would force me to hand over half of an empire I had just inherited. I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a polite, restrained chuckle. It was a loud, resonant, genuinely joyous laugh that echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system and bounced off the crystal chandeliers. The sound of my laughter sent a physical shudder through Marcus. His frantic chest heaving suddenly paused. His confident, predatory stance faltered as he looked at me in total confusion. He had expected me to recoil. He had expected his threat to terrify me. I raised my free hand and snapped my fingers once. Elias Sterling, standing near the VIP tables with the board of directors, tapped the screen of his digital tablet. The massive projector screens behind the stage went entirely black for a fraction of a second. These were the screens meant to play a glowing high-definition tribute to the 30-year legacy of the Caldwell family. They were supposed to display a curated slideshow of their charitable donations and high society galas. Instead, a brilliant, harsh white light flooded the stage, casting a blinding glow over Marcus's sweating face. A high-resolution scan of a legal document towered 20 feet high behind us. Every single person in the ballroom could read the bold black text at the very top of the screen. It read, "Fulton County Superior Court." In the center, stamped in bright, undeniable red ink, was the official seal of the state of Georgia. It was a final judgment and decree of divorce. "Split half." "Marcus," I asked, my voice slicing through the dead silence of the ballroom. I turned gracefully, lifting my hand to point at the massive screen behind him. "You really should pay closer attention to the paperwork your arrogant brother-in-law draws up for you." I began pacing slowly across the stage, the crimson silk of my gown flowing behind me. I was no longer speaking just to Marcus. I was delivering a closing argument to the most powerful people in the city. "You did not want a messy trial where a judge would order a full financial discovery," I announced, making sure my voice carried to the very back of the room. "You did not want to risk me or my lawyers finding out that your flagship fund was bleeding millions. You wanted a clean break so you could marry your billionaire mistress without any legal attachments to your past failures. So you bypassed the court. You submitted a waiver of service to skip the mandatory waiting periods and the financial disclosures." I stopped pacing and looked directly down at Trent, who was still pinned against the edge of the stage by my security guards. "Do you all see that notary stamp at the bottom of the document?" I asked the crowd, pointing to the magnified seal on the screen. "That is the official stamp from Trent's real estate firm. Trent authenticated a signature I never wrote. He notarized a document I never saw. You two orchestrated a secret, uncontested divorce right under my nose so you could bring Sienna through the front door without a single legal hitch." I turned back to Marcus. The color had completely drained from his face. He was looking at the giant date stamped next to the judge's signature. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, my tone dripping with absolute lethal triumph. "Your brilliant, ruthless plan was a roaring success. The judge signed that decree exactly 60 days ago. We have not been husband and wife since before my Uncle Harrison even passed away." The absolute magnitude of his blunder hit him with the force of a freight train. I watched his eyes dart wildly around the room as his brain tried to process the catastrophic reality of what he had done. Under Georgia marital property law, any inheritance received after a divorce is finalized is strictly separate property. Because Marcus had been so intensely greedy, because he had been so desperate to hide his own massive debts and rush his new wedding to secure a bailout, he had completely severed his legal right to claim a single penny of my newfound wealth. He had built a flawless, illegal wall to keep me out, only to realize he had locked himself entirely outside of a gold mine. The ballroom erupted. The sophisticated, quiet elite of Atlanta lost all of their composure simultaneously. Judges, politicians, and real estate moguls were gasping, whispering loudly, and pointing at the stage. The sheer monumental stupidity of Marcus Caldwell was now public record. He had thrown away a guaranteed $20 million in marital assets for a bankrupt company and a fake engagement built on a foundation of toxic debt. To my left, Sienna let out a strangled, horrified sob. She took 2 staggering steps backward, looking at Marcus as if he were a monster. The beautiful, glowing illusion of her perfect society wedding had just been violently slaughtered. She had just realized that the man she was carrying a child for was not a wealthy, misunderstood bachelor trying to escape a bitter wife. He was a broke, fraudulent, divorced con artist who had lied to her and her powerful father about absolutely everything. In the front row, Beatrice Caldwell reached up and clutched her chest. The matriarch who had spent the last 5 years telling me I was not good enough for her son stared up at the massive divorce decree. The realization hit her that the contract she tried to force me to sign in my kitchen was a completely worthless cover-up. She had offered me $10,000 to leave quietly, completely unaware she was insulting a woman worth $40 million. Her knees buckled completely. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, her expensive gold jewelry clanking harshly against the stone as she fell. Chloe screamed for her mother, dropping to the ground beside her, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face in an absolute panic. But Marcus did not look down at his collapsing mother. He did not look at his weeping pregnant mistress. His eyes were completely glazed over, locked onto the bright red seal of the divorce decree projected on the screen. His brain completely short-circuited. The loss of the money was worse to him than the loss of his reputation. He could not fathom being poor. He could not fathom that the woman he viewed as a pathetic, naive stepping stone had completely outplayed him. The greed overrode his survival instinct. The thought of $40 million slipping through his fingers shattered his last remaining thread of sanity. He forgot about the investors sitting at the tables. He forgot about the live microphones. He forgot about the elite society he had spent his entire life trying to impress. Marcus grabbed his own hair with both hands, his face contorted in a mask of absolute feral panic. "No," Marcus screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice raw and hysterical, echoing violently through the grand ballroom. "That document is fake. I had Trent forge your signature. That divorce is invalid. Give me my money back." I stood perfectly still, letting the brilliant flash of the red and blue emergency lights wash over the crimson silk of my gown. The wailing of the sirens outside the hotel cut through the dead silence of the ballroom, a deafening mechanical scream that signaled the absolute end of the Caldwell empire. Marcus remained on his knees on the polished wooden stage, his entire body trembling so violently that his teeth audibly chattered. He stared blankly at the massive oak doors at the back of the room, watching his inevitable destruction march straight down the center aisle. The federal agents moved with terrifying synchronized precision. They did not shout or draw their weapons. They did not need to. Their sheer, undeniable authority parted the crowd of elite Atlanta socialites like the Red Sea. Wealthy investors, politicians, and real estate moguls scrambled out of the way, desperate to avoid making eye contact with the authorities. No one wanted to be associated with the financial bloodbath that was about to take place. Elias Sterling stood beside me, his posture relaxed and victorious. He calmly turned the microphone off and handed it to a frozen hotel manager standing near the stairs. Elias had meticulously planned this exact timing. He had submitted the encrypted flash drive containing Marcus and Trent's fraudulent financial ledgers, the offshore transfer receipts, and the fake notary documents to his contacts at the Federal Bureau hours ago. He knew the moment Marcus publicly confessed to the forgery, the agents would have the real-time probable cause they needed to execute the arrest warrants on the spot. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from stone, stopped at the base of the stage. He looked down at Trent, who was still pinned firmly against the edge of the platform by my private security team. Trent was openly weeping now, the pain of his dislocated shoulder, mixing with the sheer terror of federal prison. The agent flashed his gold badge, the metallic glare catching the light of the chandeliers. Trenton Miller, the agent, announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the terrified murmurs of the crowd. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and the falsification of federal banking documents. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise it. Trent tried to thrash away his survival instinct, overriding all logic. He screamed that he was being set up, that his company was completely legitimate, that his brother-in-law had forced him into the offshore transfers. The federal agents completely ignored his pathetic display. They stepped forward, grabbed Trent by his uninjured arm, and roughly secured a heavy pair of steel handcuffs around his wrists, forcing him to bend awkwardly to accommodate his dislocated shoulder. They hauled the arrogant white real estate developer up from the floor, stripping away every ounce of the superiority he had weaponized against me for the last 5 years. The lead agent then turned his attention to the stage. He walked up the short flight of wooden stairs, his heavy boots echoing with terrible finality. He stopped right in front of Marcus, looking down at the broken, sweating man kneeling on the floor. Marcus Caldwell, the agent said coldly. You are under arrest for first-degree wire fraud, money laundering, forgery of state court documents, and perjury. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Marcus did not move. He seemed entirely paralyzed, his brain simply refusing to accept the reality of the handcuffs the agent was currently unclipping from his belt. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were completely bloodshot, his perfectly groomed hair matted to his forehead with cold sweat. He looked like a cornered, desperate animal begging for a way out that simply did not exist. Maya, please. Marcus croaked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Please tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I will give the investors their money back. I can fix this. You have the 40 million. You can buy the debt back. You can save the fund. We can just annul the divorce. I will marry you again. We can fix everything. Please do not let them take me. It was the most revolting, transparent display of cowardice I had ever witnessed. The man who had spent years telling me my career was a joke. The man who had laughed while his family humiliated me. The man who had secretly divorced me to steal my future was now begging me to use my own inheritance to buy his freedom. He still saw me as a resource. He still thought I was foolish enough to fall for the illusion of his love. I looked down at him, my expression entirely devoid of pity. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sorrow. I simply felt an overwhelming, incredible lightness, as if a massive, suffocating weight had just been lifted off my chest. I think you need to understand something very clearly, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low so only he and the federal agents could hear. I am not the naive, middle-class girl you thought you could easily discard. I am the architect of the cage you are currently sitting in. I bought your debt. I froze your accounts. I submitted the flash drive to the Federal Bureau. I did not come here tonight to save you. I came here to ensure you never have the opportunity to destroy another woman's life again. Marcus let out a strangled, breathless gasp. The realization hit him with physical force. He finally understood that he had not just been unlucky. He had been systematically, ruthlessly outplayed by the very woman he thought was entirely beneath him. The federal agent reached down, grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom tuxedo, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Marcus offered no resistance as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed through the silent stage. It was the sound of a closing door, the final undeniable end of his fraudulent empire. As the agents turned Marcus around to march him down the stairs, Beatrice Caldwell let out a piercing, agonizing scream from the front row. She scrambled up from the marble floor, her expensive gown wrinkled and her hair in total disarray. She pushed past a terrified guest and threw herself toward the stage, her arms outstretched toward her arrested son. Marcus! Beatrice wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. My boy, you cannot take my boy. He is a Caldwell. He is the head of this family. She lunged toward the lead federal agent, desperately trying to grab his arm to stop him from taking her golden child away. Two agents immediately stepped into her path, blocking her advance with firm, unyielding bodies. Beatrice collapsed against them, sobbing hysterically, realizing that all her social status, all her elite country club memberships, and all her arrogant pride were completely useless against federal indictments. Chloe stood frozen a few feet away, her hands covering her mouth, watching both her husband and her brother being escorted out of the ballroom in steel chains. The perfect, untouchable Caldwell family was completely destroyed, their elite legacy reduced to a humiliating public spectacle that would dominate the Atlanta news cycle for months to come. I watched them being marched down the center aisle, the flashing emergency lights reflecting off the polished marble floors. I did not stay to watch them get shoved into the back of the federal vehicles. I had seen exactly what I came to see. I turned to Elias, who gave me a sharp, respectful nod of absolute triumph. I gathered the heavy silk skirt of my crimson gown and turned my back on the wreckage of my past. I walked slowly toward the private side exit of the grand ballroom, stepping out into the cool, refreshing Atlanta night air. A sleek black private car was already waiting at the curb, its engine purring softly. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the door for me. I slid into the plush leather seat, leaning my head back against the headrest. I closed my eyes, listening to the fading sound of the police sirens in the distance, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I breathed completely, entirely free. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Marcus's wrists was the loudest sound in the entire ballroom. The federal agent secured him tightly, leaving the charismatic financial broker looking completely helpless on the polished wooden stage. But the physical restraint was nothing compared to the emotional execution that was about to take place right in front of him. Sienna stepped forward. The billionaire heiress was shaking her face, flushed with a mixture of absolute heartbreak and pure, unadulterated rage. She looked at Marcus, the man who had whispered promises of a perfect future to her just an hour ago. She looked at his handcuffed wrists, then at the massive projector screen still displaying the secret divorce decree he had forged to trick her. Her father's private security team moved in close behind her, but Sienna waved them off. She wanted to handle this herself. "You used me." Sienna's voice trembled, but it carried clearly across the silent room. "You used my father's money, you used my trust, and you used the child I am carrying as a shield for your federal crimes. You are a disgusting, pathetic fraud." Marcus opened his mouth to beg to spin one last desperate lie, but he never got the chance. Sienna raised her hand and delivered a brutal, stinging slap directly across his face. The sound cracked like a whip. Marcus's head snapped to the side, a bright red mark instantly blossoming across his cheek. Without a moment of hesitation, Sienna ripped the $2 million engagement ring off her finger. She threw it directly at his chest. The heavy diamond bounced off his custom tuxedo and clattered onto the floor, rolling away into the shadows. Sienna turned her back on him, completely grabbing her father's arm and walking straight out of the ballroom without looking back. Down on the main floor, the reality of the situation was destroying the rest of the Caldwell family. Trent was currently being read his Miranda rights by two stern federal agents. The arrogant white real estate developer who had strutted through my house dictating terms was now openly weeping. He was sobbing loudly, begging the wealthy investors sitting nearby to call his defense attorneys, swearing that Marcus had manipulated the accounting books. None of the Atlanta elite made eye contact with him. They simply turned their backs, entirely disgusted by the spectacle. Chloe watched her husband being hauled toward the exit, her perfect facade crumbling into violent hysterics. She realized in an instant that her luxury cars, her country club memberships, and her lavish lifestyle were completely gone. Her credit cards were frozen. Her properties were seized. She collapsed against a banquet table, screaming and crying, blaming everyone but herself for the greed that had poisoned her marriage. But the most spectacular collapse belonged to Beatrice Caldwell. The matriarch of the family had watched her entire legacy evaporate in a matter of minutes. She had seen her son arrested, her son-in-law disgraced, and her carefully cultivated reputation among Atlanta's black elite permanently incinerated. The federal agents began to march Marcus toward the stairs to lead him away. Panic, raw and suffocating, overrode every ounce of Beatrice's suffocating pride. She broke away from the crowd, She did not walk or run toward me. Beatrice Caldwell, a woman who had spent 5 years treating me like dirt on her designer shoes, dropped to her knees on the marble floor. She scrambled forward, her heavy gold bracelets scraping harshly against the polished stone. She crawled directly to my feet, entirely abandoning her aristocratic dignity. Beatrice threw her arms around my legs, clutching the crimson silk of my couture gown with desperate, trembling hands. "Maya, I am begging you!" Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking into a high, pathetic shriek. "Please look at me. I am begging you as a mother. You have the power to stop this. Tell the federal agents you signed that waiver willingly. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding about the timeline. Tell them you will use the 40 million to clear the debt and make the investors whole. You can save Marcus. Please do not let them put my boy in a cage." I looked down at the woman gripping my legs. I remembered her standing in my cramped kitchen, tossing a check onto the counter, telling me I was nothing but a middle-class burden dragging her son down. I remembered her sneering at my clothes, mocking my career, and pushing me toward the door so she could welcome a wealthier replacement. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I calmly reached down and firmly detached her frantic hands from my dress. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, completely removing myself from her physical grasp. I looked down at her from my towering heels, my expression carved from pure ice. "Do you remember standing in my home, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice smooth, steady, and utterly ruthless. "Do you remember dropping a typed confession on my table and telling me that if I took the blame for Marcus's failures, you would give me $10,000 to disappear quietly?" Beatrice stared up at me, tears streaming through her ruined makeup, her mouth opening and closing in silent, terrified panic. "You told me to take the money and go back to where I came from." I smiled down at her, delivering the final fatal blow. "Well, I have decided to take your financial advice. Keep your $10,000, Beatrice. You are going to need every single penny of it to buy Marcus his favorite snacks in the federal prison canteen." Beatrice let out a devastated, gut-wrenching wail, collapsing face first onto the cold marble floor. On the stage, Marcus heard every word. The last shred of his arrogant delusion shattered. He realized there was no negotiation, no buyout, and absolutely no mercy coming from the woman he had tried to discard. The federal agents grabbed him by the biceps and forcefully marched him down the wooden stairs. As they dragged him through the center aisle of the ballroom, Marcus completely lost his mind. He thrashed against the steel handcuffs, twisting his body around to look back at the stage. "Maya!" Marcus screamed, his voice tearing through the silent crowd. "Maya, please! You cannot do this to me! I am your husband! You have to help me! Maya!" His desperate, hysterical screams echoed off the crystal chandeliers. He shouted my name over and over again, begging the very woman he had secretly divorced to somehow save his life. The wealthy guests pulled away in disgust, watching the former golden boy of Atlanta finance being hauled out like a common street criminal. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open, revealing the flashing red and blue emergency lights waiting in the hotel lobby. The agents shoved Marcus through the threshold. The heavy doors slammed shut behind him with a resonant final thud, cutting off his frantic screaming entirely. The silence that followed was absolute. The Caldwell empire was officially dead, buried under the crushing weight of their own greed. I stood center stage in my crimson gown, the dazzling diamonds resting perfectly against my collarbone. I looked out at the sea of terrified elites, knowing that tomorrow the only name anyone in this city would be talking about was mine. The heavy oak doors of the Four Seasons Hotel closed behind me, shutting out the chaotic symphony of flashing police lights and panicked shouting. I did not stay to answer questions from the bewildered reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the federal raid. I simply walked out to my waiting car, sank into the plush leather seat, and told the driver to take me home. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, feeling the last remaining threads of my old life detach and fall away into the darkness. I am sitting on my emerald green velvet sofa right now. I am holding a glass of vintage red wine, the very same label Sienna supposedly secured for that ridiculous family dinner, and I am watching the Atlanta skyline glittering endlessly through my penthouse windows. It has been exactly 8 months since that night at the gala, and the dust has finally settled over the absolute ruins of the Caldwell family empire. The federal trial concluded last month, and it was a spectacular, highly publicized disgrace. I sat in the back of the courtroom every single day wearing immaculate designer suits, watching the men who tried to ruin me turn on each other like starving animals. Marcus tried every pathetic trick in the book to save his own skin. He hired high-priced defense attorneys, using the absolute last drops of his mother's savings, trying to claim he was the innocent victim of a complex corporate misunderstanding. When that failed, he tried to throw Trent completely under the bus. Marcus took the stand and testified that Trent had masterminded the entire offshore embezzlement scheme. Trent immediately retaliated by providing the federal prosecutors with every single email, text message, and encrypted file proving Marcus was the primary architect of the fraud. Watching the arrogant white savior and the golden boy of Atlanta finance tear each other apart under oath was better than any television show I could have ever watched. Marcus even tried his final, most desperate legal maneuver. He filed a motion arguing that because we were legally married when the investment fund was initially created, I should be held partially responsible for the financial liabilities of his fraud. The federal judge, a brilliant and no-nonsense woman who saw right through his staggering arrogance, completely dismantled his defense in open court. She pointed out that his own forged divorce decree, the very document he used to try to leave me destitute, legally severed me from his financial crimes long before the federal raid even occurred. Marcus was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and forgery. I was in the gallery when they read the verdict. He cried. There was no dignity left in him, no charismatic smile, no tailored tuxedo. Just a broken, weeping man realizing his charm could not manipulate a federal judge. Trent met a similarly devastating fate. His deeply ingrained superiority complex could not protect him from the Securities and Exchange Commission. His real estate broker license was permanently and completely revoked. His company was totally liquidated by the federal bankruptcy courts to pay off the massive debts he owed to Apex Holdings. This meant every single dime of his liquidated assets flowed directly into my corporate accounts. Trent was forced to declare total absolute bankruptcy. He currently works as an hourly shift manager at a hardware store 2 towns over. Chloe, who had spent her entire adult life mocking my middle-class background and flaunting her husband's wealth, suddenly found herself married to a broke, disgraced felon. She had to sell her luxury vehicles, her designer handbags, and move out of her gated community just to afford basic living expenses. In a truly hilarious twist of fate, Chloe actually showed up at the lobby of my public relations firm 2 months ago. She was wearing a cheap off-the-rack suit, holding a poorly formatted resume, looking to see if I had any open assistant positions. I did not even go down to the lobby to meet her. I simply had my front desk security guard inform her that we were not hiring and politely ask her to exit the premises. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a mid-tier fitness center, actively avoiding anyone from our old social circle because she could not bear the severe humiliation of her new reality. Beatrice Caldwell suffered the absolute worst punishment of all for a woman completely obsessed with status and social hierarchy. The Caldwell name became entirely radioactive in Atlanta. She was quietly and swiftly expelled from all her elite social boards, charity committees, and country club memberships. No one wanted to be associated with the mother of a convicted federal fraudster. To pay for Marcus's extensive legal fees and settle the remaining civil fines, Beatrice was forced to sell the sprawling Buckhead mansion. I actually considered buying it through one of my shell companies just to demolish it and turn it into a community garden, but I realized I did not want that toxic energy anywhere near my investment portfolio. I let a rival real estate developer buy the property for pennies on the dollar. Beatrice now lives in a tiny, cramped rented condo on the industrial outskirts of the city. I saw her once from a distance, waiting at a bus stop because she could no longer afford a personal vehicle. She looked haggard, clutching a worn-out purse, completely isolated from the high society she valued more than her own soul. We made eye contact for a split second. The profound shame in her eyes was unmistakable before she quickly looked down at the pavement. Sienna, the billionaire heiress, completely erased Marcus from her life before the trial even began. Her father's aggressive legal team ensured Marcus gave up all parental rights in exchange for them dropping additional civil lawsuits against him. Marcus will never see a single dime of that family wealth, and he will never meet the child he tried to use as a financial anchor. Sienna moved back to the West Coast, entirely abandoning the wreckage of her Atlanta engagement. As for me, I have never been more powerful or at peace. My public relations firm is thriving beyond my wildest expectations, but I do not take on vanity events for arrogant socialites anymore. I only work with corporate clients and charitable foundations who respect my time and my vision. But my true passion lies entirely elsewhere now. I took a significant portion of my $40 million inheritance and established a comprehensive legal aid foundation right here in Atlanta. We provide top-tier legal representation, forensic accounting, and private security services to women who are facing financial abuse, hidden assets, and fraudulent divorce tactics from manipulative spouses. I make sure no woman who walks through our doors ever feels cornered the way Beatrice and Trent tried to corner me in my cramped kitchen. We hire the absolute best financial auditors in the state to track down every single hidden bank account, offshore transfer, and secret property deed. We level the playing field, giving women the exact ammunition they need to fight back and claim every single penny they are owed. Last week, we helped a young mother uncover $3 million her husband had hidden in cryptocurrency just days before he filed for divorce. Watching her walk out of the courtroom with her financial future secured gave me a level of satisfaction that money simply cannot buy. Elias Sterling sits on the board of directors for my foundation. We still meet for coffee once a month to discuss new cases, review investment strategies, and occasionally reminisce about the night we brought down the Caldwell Empire. I have built a life surrounded by genuine, fiercely loyal people who value authenticity and hard work over designer labels and hollow social status. My days are no longer spent tiptoeing around a fragile man's ego or shrinking myself to make a toxic mother-in-law comfortable. I own my time, I own my space, I own my future. Many people in the Atlanta social scene still whisper about me when I walk into a room. Some of them call me ruthless. They say I was cold-blooded for letting my ex-husband walk blindly into a federal trap. They say I destroyed a prominent legacy family just to make a point. But the truth is, I did not do anything to them. I did not forge a divorce decree. I did not embezzle millions of dollars from innocent clients. I did not buy a $2 million engagement ring for a pregnant mistress using stolen corporate funds. I did not kick down an apartment door to threaten a woman, and I did not try to bribe a wife to destroy her own reputation. I simply handed them a rope named greed, and they eagerly took it and used it to hang themselves. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so convinced that their wealth and their status made them entirely untouchable, that they built their own prison cell and locked the door from the inside. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my patience was stupidity. When Elias first told me about the secret divorce, I could have screamed. I could have confronted Marcus immediately and demanded half of the crumbling, debt-ridden investment fund. If I had reacted with raw emotion, if I had let my heartbreak dictate my actions, I would have been dragged down into the mud right alongside them. Instead, I took a breath. Those 5 seconds of dead silence in the lawyer's office, that tiny window of time where I chose strategy over sorrow, changed the entire trajectory of my existence. Those 5 seconds were the most valuable 5 seconds of my life.